So basically, I guess if you could sum up my collection in 2 words, it would probably be cannibalistic symbolism.
Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Beyond the Manuscript. As always, I am your host, Cooper Anderson, coming to you from my very own library pocket dimension. If you like what I do here, please hit those 4 little butts that helps me do what I love, which is talk to you lovely folks about books. And if you got an extra second, please leave a review. It's always going to help out the channel as much as possible. Thank you. My guest today is a high school English and creative writing teacher in charge of her school's publishing club, here today to talk about her indie debut horror collection, American Appetites, and her upcoming poetry collection, Changeling. Please help me welcoming my guest today, Miss Kristen Reid. How are we doing today, Kristen?
I am very happy to be here. I'm super, super excited. I love anytime I can talk about my writing.
Yeah. Well, I was just really intrigued by your bio where it says that you love cowboys, American horrors, and monstrous women, and I'm like, I'm hooked. I'm there. Those are all amazing things that I want to talk about today. Yeah, yeah. So, Kristen, to kind of get things started off today, can you please tell us all about American Appetites?
Yes, I'd love to. Okay, so the book came out October 2022, so it's not super, been around that long. But it's a collection of folk horror, weird western, southern gothic tales set in about the 18th century to early 20th century. And it's set in the deep south, but also the Appalachian Hills. And it's a mix of just like terrible, monstrous humans, also mixing with like real cryptids, real supernatural elements. Just kind of exploring and commenting on the dark side of humanity, because I love making the humans, the main characters, the bad guys in a lot of these stories. And so I try to emphasize that with each of these in some way. So basically, I guess if you could sum up my collection in 2 words, it would probably be cannibalistic symbolism. That's the main thing.
That's pretty good. That's pretty good one for sure. Yeah. So speaking of stuff like cowboys, horrors, and monsters, just kind of people in general, what is it about those specific 3 elements that you think really complement each other in order to create really good stories?
Well, when I first started writing this, it started off as a historical work about the Civil War, and then I've always been a dark literature person, and so I added in a few like creepy things here and there, and it slowly became horror. And I didn't even know that like weird Western and folk horror were a genre because I was pretty new to this community, and so I didn't know that what I was doing was actually a genre. And so I think mainly as far as like horror with like the cowboys and the Civil War and things, um, that time period in humanity from the Civil War to the Wild West days is so dark as far as humanity goes because you had people fighting against each other. It was just there was no rules, there was no real morality, um, and so combining that with actual real monsters and having the monsters and the humans kind of mirror each other, I really like love blending those things. Um, and as far as monstrous women go, I I always have usually now with my collection this isn't always true, but like if I'm writing a novel or something, I usually do female main characters because I'm a woman and I can get in that headspace. um, and I like giving women characters an option to basically go crazy. Like you don't have to be perfect. You don't have to fit into the standards that are set. And I think also doing that in the time period from like the 18th century to the 20th century where women weren't didn't have a big voice at that time. I liked giving them that opportunity to, hey, go crazy, like be a horrible monster and kind of get revenge and stuff. So I love blending all those things.
Absolutely. Yeah. We've had another guest on the show here. Her name is Megan Jeanette, and she had a very realistic thriller book that she was promoting here, kind of about the same subject, where it's about a female serial killer who's going around killing a bunch of men. And she really gets into the character's head and honestly kind of just, I wouldn't say justify because that's probably not the right word, but she really explains the thought process and also just kind of the general crappiness that women kind of have to deal with on a day to day basis, usually from dudes. And there's like, okay, you can kind of see the leap from something that, just kind of women kind of deal with all the time to, okay, now we're just murdering them.
Hmm.
And that's what I think was what makes it really interesting is there is just a small dose of reality kind of mixed
Hmm.
into all this other kind of stuff there. So that's really cool. Another thing I do want to mention is that I really like is because you were mentioning this before, especially with Westerns. So there's this kind of, I don't know, a lack of morality, which
Yeah.
means that a lot of people are kind of on their own when it comes to quote unquote justice.
Hmm.
And that is a big element of horror is being on your own when you're separated from the party and the monster is slowly picking people off. So this is not too different from being on your own in a gunfight in the middle of a saloon somewhere in the middle of nowhere, miles and miles from a
Hmm.
doctor.
Yeah, and now that I've thought about it, I do like a lot of my characters do have an isolation element to them. Either they're isolated from society in some form or fashion, or they end up getting isolated from the rest of the group. So I guess I unintentionally kind of gravitate towards isolation as another thing. So
So here's a fun question for you. If you had to choose your individual favorites of those three categories of cowboys, whores, and monstrous women, what would they be?
um, I think probably Monstrous Woman has to take the cake because I've been working on a novel for basically, gosh, I guess it's been over 6 years. I've been doing it since high school, just kind of here and there, not really doing it as like a main thing, just kind of on the side when I have time. And her whole character is kind of, which did I do it intentionally? Did I do it unintentionally? I don't know. But she's kind of a bit of like a part of like me and like past traumas I've gone through, things that have happened to me. And so in writing her, it's been kind of therapeutic for me, to kind of like exercise my demons. um, and so it slowly, like this little side thing kind of turned into a novel actually that's like coming into fruition. And so I guess I gravitate towards like monstrous women characters a lot is it's because I suppose it's kind of like giving my past self a way to get revenge or right wrongs in a fictional sense. Like she is a supernatural kind of being, and so she does a lot of bad, terrible things. But she does those things, I guess, because of what's happened to her. And so it's all about that journey through things that have happened to us and how, like, are we going to become a monster, are we going to maybe eventually like not see ourselves as the horrors that have been done to us, those are the horrors instead of us being the horrors. And that's kind of what my poetry collection I think is a little bit too. It's a lot of the journey of womanhood but kind of taking like the darker side of it. So
Sure, absolutely. I think you mentioned this kind of a little bit earlier is that, there's a little bit of yourself in the character that you're writing. And I think that's the best kind of writing. You can kind of create a character that feels the same thing that you feel or felt, but you can change that character's destiny or how they deal with this adversity or how they deal with this feeling. And I do think that's incredibly therapeutic because I've written stories before where, oh, this is clearly my
mhm.
18-year-old self with dealing with this particular problem in a very different way than I dealt with it when I was at that age. And it feels good to kind of indulge in that cranking that knob up to 11 and yeah, and seeing how this situation would play out. And a lot of times, well, for me anyways, it usually doesn't work out for that person because we live in a society and this
Yeah,
person tends to as well. But it's definitely a fun way of kind of dealing with the stuff from our past for sure.
yeah.
So, when it comes to writing, so many people give it a try and they realize, oh, this is a lot harder than I thought it was going to be. And then they give up because their first story wasn't perfect or whatever. With that in mind, did you have a particular moment in your life when you realized, oh, maybe I can write a story, or maybe my skills have grown a bit here, and you kind of kept going?
Hmm. Well, I'm kind of mine's a little unique in that like I've been writing since I could form words. Like my so like I would tell stories to my mom and she would write down my stories on folded computer paper and I would do like little illustrations. I've been doing it all my life. So there's always been like a part of me in my blood that's had a passion for it. And I didn't really do anything with it. Like it was just kind of like a fun little thing that I kind of grew out of when I was in like middle school and a little bit into high school. But when I went to college, I had a professor, which I don't know if he'll watch this, but shout out Dr. Pelton, I love you. um, he was my professor who really like pushed me, and he was like, "Hey, you've got something here. If you'll, work at this or you'll do this, you can grow it." And so I was like, "Okay, like, oh, I'll try." And so I started getting into which I've always kind of been in the darker stuff. I'm influenced by Edgar Allan Poe. I know everybody claims that, but he's my influence. And so I've always leaned that way. And so I did some horror stories. At that point in time, it was very cliche and basically a rewrite of stuff. And so he'd be like, if you have some like originality maybe bleeding into it to like maybe scrap everything and start all over and try to do your own thing, because I think imitating a lot of writers, and like it's hard as a writer to find your own style. Like you have to, what sets me apart. And um so I kept working at it, and then I sent one of my stories eventually into a publisher, and I was like, there's no way they're gonna do anything with me because I can't even tell you how many rejections up to that point. But they accepted me, and I did not think they were gonna give me the time of day. And so after that, I was kind of like, hey, like maybe. And so I kept working at it. I would try to write like a paragraph a day of something just so I could like start growing my skills. Kept doing submissions, got tons of rejections, but got a few acceptances here and there. And so I guess at that point I was like, hey, like maybe I am good at this if other people are wanting to read it. And so I will say, I think all of us creatives suffer with imposter syndrome, and I suffer with it horribly. So, like, I will be like, you're like, one day I'm like, oh, my writing's really good. I love this. And other days I'm like, you are terrible. You're awful. Like, poets spit on your work. And yeah, I suffer bad with it because I think we compare ourselves to others instead of us like seeing our own writer journey. Um, and so I guess like, I think a lot of people like either they don't have that push, like even if you get rejected a million times, you might get that acceptance. And I guess I just had thought to myself, you may not like my work, but somebody out there will. And I think, and that's why I tell my kids, my publishing kids, is like, you may get rejections, but there is somebody out there that your world is built for. And that to grow is to just, you may have to scrap everything and start from square one. But if you want to write, there's a writer in you somewhere.
It's so interesting how crucial early encouragement is. Like,
Oh,
because I
yeah.
was very similar in that when I went to college, I had like a creative writing professor, and he wasn't even as kind as what your professor sounds like. Mine was just like, hey, your stuff doesn't suck. And that was just enough like gasoline on that tiny little fire in me to be like, oh, this is the only thing that I want to do now. I'm going to keep doing this forever. So, before we actually got started today, I didn't know that you were a high school creative writing teacher. So, as someone who's also been a teacher kind of around the world, how do you approach a subject like creative writing with your students?
So my high school had nothing like creative writing. And this is my area, and I was like, hey, like, do you guys, maybe want to do creative writing class? And they had told me like nobody really wanted it. Like there were never kids that signed up for it because they just didn't care. And so I kind of got my foot in the door with making the class because I had kids that I'd already taught. They're like, hey, I'll take a class. Miss Reed teaches it. And I was like, great. And so I start small with them. Like we start kind of like at square one. So like I start like, hey, try to just do setting one day, or try to just do a character template one day. And then I kind of give them little tidbits here and there until they jump out on their own. And so it's hard a lot because kids are so negative, which I'm negative on myself as a writer, but they're so negative because they're like, Miss Reed, this is so bad. I don't want you to read it. And it's I've told them before, being a writer, and I think I heard this from even one of my professors, so I'm not trying to steal it from him if he ever hears this, but being a writer is like standing on a stage completely naked and have everybody point at you and laugh. And so I've told them like you to do this, like you just have to make that leap and say the worst thing somebody can say to me is no, and I just move on. And so I try to start with the encouragement as best I can because I know high schoolers need a lot. But right now we're working on poetry. They've gotten short stories done at this point. And I'm not, I have a poetry book coming out. I'm not a poet really. Like I'm a short story writer. So they're like, Sure, does this sound good? I'm like, yeah, it's better than mine because I don't know what I'm doing half the time with the poems. Um, but yeah, for them, I try to be what my writing professors were, was like you said, that encouragement, because for a writer, like to already have encouragement already like helps tons because you feel confident to approach it if you've got support. So
So now I'm curious, is because you said you were really disciplined when it comes to writing short stories and stuff. Do you have that same kind of discipline for poetry, or is it kind of just I feel this big emotion, I need to write it down on a piece of paper, and then boom, eventually you're going to have a collection of poetry? Which method do you subscribe to?
actually, that one. And I kind of do that with both of my fiction. Like, I don't outline anything. I'm a pantser, so I basically just like usually my characters come to me and I build the story around the characters. So I know if you like, yeah, like us trying to tell non-writers, like, hey, like my characters just kind of come to me and talk to me, and they're like, "Are do you need to be on medication?" It's like, but they do they speak to me, and so I build the stories around them. But with poetry, I think I'm more of a pantser than I am with the fiction because yeah, it is I only write poems if I'm upset, really angry, or like in pain or anything. I do a lot of like I don't do it's darker poetry. So like I've got my horror writing. This is kind of like a flowery, dark side of poetry that's more emotionally charged. So both of them, I'm pretty chaotic with writing. I if I have a plan, I write really bad because it's like I try to meet a goal. I guess I don't know. But if I just have a blank screen and just go, I tend to kind of do better that way. Just not having a real plan and kind of making it up as I go.
Sure. Yeah. Well, for me, what I tend to do is I have an idea of what I kind of want the story to be. It's not an outline. It's just kind of like kind of see what the story is going to be. But what I do then is I meticulously craft characters and I describe them down to like the size of their shoes and like what their style is and their history. And I kind of just aim them. And then if they change course because that's who they are and that's what the story calls for, then I tend not to fight it all that much.
They do change course a lot. Mine decide the story, and I'm like, "Wait, that's not working." They're like, "Oh, well, sorry, like, we're changing it." So, yeah, me too.
But yeah, definitely. Another thing I want to kind of point out with that is that if your goal is to write prose, so you know, like short stories, novels, whatever, you kind of need that discipline. You know, you just want to hack away at it a little bit at a time, pretty consistently, whether that's every day, a big chunk during once a week, whatever. However, if it's your goal to be a poet, just wait for those big emotions. They're
Mhm.
going to come. You know, human experience tends to
Oh,
bring
yeah.
those whether we want them to or not. And then you can kind of write your poetry that way.
Mhm.
All right, next one is what is a really good comfort book slash story for you that you seem to keep coming back to over and over again?
So this is gonna be really funny because, I'm a horror dark person, but it's actually a young adult book, Howl's Moving Castle by Diana.
Diana Wynne Jones. Yes,
Mhm.
ma'am.
Yes.
Oh, I love it so much. It's like that is my favorite all-time animated movie. It's my favorite animated movie ever.
Me too, yes. Catherine
There's nothing
House.
better. I have a huge video essay that I want to write about it, and then record one day. But yes, please, please. I'm talking too much. Please tell me more about Diana Wynn.
I'm glad you also like it because yeah, I always say it and then people are like, "Oh, the animation movie." I'm like, "Yeah, but the book's really good too." Yeah, I actually saw the movie first, and I loved the movie so much that I was like, "Oh my gosh, like I gotta read the book." And I love the book more. I think the book's got more oomph to the characters and more details to it.
What's so different too, because it's so anyone who's not read both, or sorry, if you even watched the movie and read the book simultaneously, they both start off pretty much the same way, and then about halfway through, the movie changes on a dime. And it becomes strictly what I consider one of the best anti-war movies I think
Mhm.
out there. And it's very different from the book. I don't want to spoil the book, so if you really enjoy the movie, I always encourage reading the book too, but don't get surprised that it's different.
Yeah. I I think I like how she does the characters more than the movie portrayed them. They feel more real in the book. But yeah, I love it. Well, I usually read fantasy, but yeah, I just love it because the world's comforting, the characters are comforting. I like the snarkiness between the characters, the humor, and I every time I read it or watch the movie, like I feel like I just want to curl up into this world and like be there. And so I guess like having a horror dark heart, I need a little bit of fluffy sunshine.
Yeah, everyone
Yeah.
needs a little calcifer in their life.
Yes, exactly.
So my next question is, as an indie author, how do you navigate things like marketing, promoting yourself across so many social media platforms, and most importantly, how do you know when to like put your phone down and just stop looking at things like your analytics?
Ooh, yeah, as a writer, it is hard to be a writer, and but it is even harder to market your book. Yeah, it's rough. And like this is my first ever book, and so I didn't know the process. I didn't know about pre-orders. Like I kind of just went in blind, which was a mistake. But I know now, what to do differently. But I will say, funny enough, my biggest engagement is on TikTok, and so I use TikTok a lot to promote my book. Because it's harder, I think, on like Instagram and like Twitter and Facebook sometimes. Because if you don't get the right hashtag, maybe it never gets seen. But on TikTok, like sometimes they push stuff out based on the music you use or anything, and so yeah, I've got a pretty good following on my TikTok from this kind of stuff, and that's mainly where I promote it is on there. And I think us as writers, like when we promote stuff, or at least me, I like feel like I'm bothering my followers because it's like you have to post like 15 times a day sometimes to just get it out there. Like, I'm sorry, but I'm just trying to get people to see my book. Um, but yeah, I think which because I like I said, I deal with imposter syndrome, and so yeah, like if I'm doom scrolling and I see an author that has like 30,000 likes, and then my most recent one, got maybe 100, and it's like, is it ever going to get out there? And so yeah, it can be very what's the word? It can be kind of it can be like feeding the imposter
It's
syndrome.
daunting. It
Yeah,
is. It's big.
yeah.
It's a big, daunting test for sure. Cause like it's like you said, like being especially an indie author, let alone just an author in general.
Mm,
It's all up to you, and it's how much effort you're putting into this is what you
mhm.
hope to get is the same effort back,
Yes,
but it's
yes.
not guaranteed. So you have to keep hammering away at it. Yeah. So my next question is, what are you working on now?
Okay, so I am dabbling in the poetry world. um, I am going, well, I've got all my poems done. I've gotten the whole process of making the cover and all kinds of stuff like that. It's just meshing it all now into the publication. But it's a poetry collection called Changeling. And I guess how I would describe it is kind of like trauma dumping anger, rage, but make it like aesthetic fairy enchanted forest. Like Hosier and Florence and the Machine had a poetry baby and it was born in a dark forest type vibe. Um, and so, like I kind of mentioned a little bit, it's a dive into the womanhood journey. um not just like my personal stuff that's happened, but like I try am trying to embody the whole um aspect of being a woman, I suppose. And so it's letting me kind of bleed my sorrow and anger onto the page, hoping that another woman could read it and find solace in my work. And so I kind of like seeing it as like, yeah, like these bad things have happened, but finding victory in this rebirth. And so, kind of like the main image of the poetry collection is the Luna moth. So, like, it starts, like, I try to do like little dividers. Like, it starts with the caterpillar, the cocoon, and then finally, like, the flight with the moth. And so that's kind of the vibes I'm going for with it. But right now, I think I've got about 20 poems in the collection. I just wrote one the other day and I was like, great, now I have to add that. But yeah, I'm hoping I can get everything in order, everything, the cover, dimensions, the chapter headings, all that good stuff. And have it published in the fall. I'm hoping if things go according to plan. Being a teacher does not give me a lot of time, so I use the summers a lot for like my writing, and so I'm hoping this summer I can get all of this stuff done. But I do have kind of an announcement this summer with American Appetites. I will be at, if anybody's in the Tennessee area, I will be at CreepyCon, and I get to be a guest vendor for CreepyCon and talk about my book and sell my books. So that's also coming up. That's something exciting. So
Well, all right. Well, we are kind of running out of time here, Kristen. So, can you please tell us where can people find your stuff?
yes, so I'm mainly on TikTok and Instagram. My Instagram is at writer Kristen Reid, and then my TikTok is at Cowgirl Medusa, which is kind of strange, but it kind of embodies me. But yeah, and I also have links to my link tree on both of those profiles that take you to my author website, all my publications, my Goodreads page. And then I'll also post updates of like CreepyCon and other things that are going on those. But yeah, I live and die by the Goodreads account. It helps to get reviews on Goodreads and on Barnes and Noble and Amazon, obviously. And so, yeah, if anybody gets my book, I always am like, please review because it helps indie authors so much. But yeah,
Absolutely. Yeah. And also, all of those links are, of course, going to be in the description down below. All right. That is going to do it for us here today at Beyond the Manuscript, which, of course, is powered by Manuscripts, where you never write alone. I want to thank my guest today, Miss Kristen Reid, for coming on the show today. Thank you again so much, Kristen. And yeah, hope you have a great rest of your week.
thank you for having me. I love doing this. So.